Jason.
We are going to go started. I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Annette Leva. I am the Technical Services Division Administrator for the Oregon Water Resources Department. The team for this rulemaking effort also includes Justin Iverson, who is the Groundwater Section Manager, and Laura Hart, who is our Policy Analyst and Rulemaking Coordinator. Thank you very much for your interest in this topic, and thank you for making time to come tonight. So I want to just kind of go over how we're going to proceed this evening. So this, we will have an informational session from 5:30 to 6:30. That clock is a little fast, and Justin is going to share provide an informational overview of what is in the proposed rules. His presentation is about 35 minutes long. We will have an opportunity for you all to ask questions once his presentation is done. If there are too many questions and we don't get to all of them because we need to adjourn promptly at 6:30, that's what the 3x5 note cards are for. So if there are questions that we don't get to due to time limitations, we will take them and then post those answers on our website. Everybody here who has one of these name tags on is an OWRD employee. So if you need anything, feel free to grab one of us. There's a few other folks who are downstairs currently making sure that people find their way to us. So as I mentioned, Justin is going to start with a presentation. We would request that you hold your questions until after his presentation is done. The informational session is not part of the official public hearing. If you would like to submit comments, you will need to either do that through the department's website in writing or wait until the public hearing starts at 7 o'clock. And when we do get to the question and answer period, we'll call on people and we'll run you a mic. And I think that's all I have. So with that, I will turn it over to Justin Iverson, who is the department's groundwater section manager.
Thank you very much. So I'm just going to jump right in. Annette just described that this is kind of an informational session. Happy to answer questions afterwards, and this is intended just to give everybody a baseline understanding of what we're doing and why, and kind of get us all on the same level to begin with. So let's see if this is going to work. Oh, all right. Well,
We did test it.
we tested it.
Can you try the keyboard?
Yeah, I'll just do it from up here. I bet it'll work. All right. Try again. There we go. Okay. Presentation here is broken into several pieces. I'm going to give an introduction to just groundwater and development throughout the state over time. We're going to talk about some signs of over appropriation we've seen and the negative impacts that leads to. Talk about an overview of the rulemaking. Oh man, that we're here to describe today, and we will. And we'll then focus on kind of two major changes in the rulemaking that we're gonna focus on. They're the two most consequential things that are proposed in this rulemaking. Talk about the implications of that and the expected benefits. And then we'll have, again, time to answer any questions folks might have. Okay. Did you need something, Laura?
I was gonna see if the arrow key on the wireless keyboard maybe would work instead. That's just something to try. If that
Okay, sure. So let's start with just introduction to groundwater. So I always want to start out with the water cycle here, something hopefully many of us have seen some rendition of or familiar with. And I put that up there just to start out by saying that we're focused on groundwater in this rulemaking and in this presentation, and groundwater is just one piece of the hydrologic cycle. And it's a component that starts when precipitation, snowmelt, what have you, infiltrates into the ground below the root zone, percolates down to the water table, joins the water table, and that input is variable throughout the year, but over longer periods of time, years, decades, it's a pretty constant input. to the groundwater system. And if you have constant input someplace, that means that you've got some driver of flow. And so groundwater is a flowing component of the groundwater system. And it's, receiving continuous variable input, and it's going someplace. And where that goes, in many places in Oregon, is to a discharge point where groundwater exits the ground to support spring flow and stream base flow, and other surface water bodies. And so this circle here that I've got, and hopefully folks can see it in yellow there, that interface where groundwater kind of leaves the subsurface and joins the surface water system, we term that hydraulic connection. So I'll mention hydraulic connection throughout this presentation and throughout the rulemaking. That's what we're talking about, is where the groundwater exits to the surface water. Now, when we develop groundwater and put a well in, we're taking water out of the ground from somewhere along that flow path and bringing it to the surface to use it. And so we're taking water, again, along that flow path. And if we pull that out, that means that there's less water going to where it normally or used to go, which was to surface water. So I want to show that to reinforce that again in a different way. So there's a picture of a spring along the Metolius River in Central Oregon. And again, I hope it's relatively intuitive that if we put a well into the ground just above that spring, we start pumping it, the amount of water we pump out is going to be that much water less coming into the spring or flowing out of the spring to the river. We can push that well back further away, and that'll spread out the timing of the impact, and it might spread out the spatial impact, but it's eventually, given enough time, as you pump water out from that flow system, it's going to be less water that comes out to the surface water. And that's a cumulative or additive process. So if we put in a lot of wells, that means that each of those wells is going to sum up to that much water not reaching the surface water body. So develop, we have this set of maps shows well development from 1955 to 2016. And we added about 250,000 water wells over that period. And this is a density map, so the warmer dots, each dot is a density of wells per square mile. Warmer ones are more, purple ones are cooler, but you can see that the development hasn't been uniform across the state. And so in places where we develop a lot in a small area, or even where we develop a relatively small amount in an area that doesn't have a very productive aquifer, we can start to see some issues. And we'll touch on that in a second. Want to give some context for those 250,000 water wells. So this plot is showing, if you just look at the blue bars, the percent of that 250,000 water wells by type. So probably hard to read from where you're at, but on the far left is domestic wells, right? Self-serve domestic sources makes up about 88%, almost 90% of all the water wells that have gone in around the state. And then the bars kind of shrink to the right. So irrigation wells make up about 7% of that 250,000. Community wells, which includes like the city of Grande, other kind of municipal, quasi-municipal supply, 1% of the wells. Now, if you shift your attention to the red bars, that's percent of the total estimated groundwater use annually by those types of wells. So these self-serve domestic wells, about 4%, irrigation, 82%, by far the largest user, community wells, 10%. So just give some context for that 250,000 water wells, but I also want to use this as an opportunity to say, this rulemaking is about allocating new water rights for future groundwater uses. And so none of these 250,000 wells that we're looking at here will be affected by this rulemaking. And the domestic wells, some of the livestock wells, industrial wells with limits on it, are exempt from the permitting process. So even going forward, this rulemaking isn't going to affect those uses that are exempt from permitting. Okay, so what it will affect is future applications for a water right to irrigate or serve a municipality, types of uses that require water rights in Oregon. Okay, so need for rulemaking. So in places, as I showed a couple of slides ago with the maps where we've developed densely or we've developed in aquifers that aren't terribly productive, we're starting to see over allocation, right? We've issued more water rights than the natural system is able to sustain. And that can lead to a number of like negative impacts. So we can dry up wells in some areas, or at the very least, increase pumping costs if we're dropping water levels. We can, as we saw in the first couple sets of slides, we can reduce stream flow by reducing the amount of groundwater that reaches the stream. It can lead to curtailment of rights that folks have invested in, and can in some places lead to deterioration of water quality. And we see signs of this all throughout the state. So this plot just shows where we have monitored water level data that shows that water levels have declined year on year in spring highs, 50 feet or more from their highest known levels. So that's another definition in the rules that relates to water levels that have excessively declined. And again, those are clustered in some places, but we have evidence of that throughout the state. This map shows where we've received complaints of dry wells around the state just since summer of 2021. Again, clustered in some places, but they exist throughout the state. I also want to say wells can go dry for any number of reasons, but certainly over appropriation and declining groundwater levels can exacerbate those and sometimes can be the dominant cause. Going a little further down that groundwater flow path to where it comes out to surface water, this map shows surface water availability in August for various watersheds throughout the state. All the tan areas here are fully allocated in August. So again, that groundwater discharge to surface water makes up in hydraulically connected streams, which is often but not always, makes up a more significant proportion of base flow generally in the summer than in other months. And so here in hydraulically connected systems where groundwater is discharging to surface water, we've already promised or allocated that water, that flow path to surface water users. And in many parts of the state, there's not enough water for those surface water users already. And so this plot is showing the earliest date to which a water master regulates back a surface water body throughout the state. So these dates relate to just one stream, but that doesn't mean that other streams don't have similar issues. But we can see that in the eastern and southern parts of the state, we had already allocated all of the available surface water by the 1800s, right? So if folks on some streams in these basins don't have an 1800s water right, everybody else gets curtailed off. And again, those folks are depending on that groundwater discharge to support their senior uses. So over allocation has these negative impacts. We're starting to see signs of over allocation throughout the state. Shouldn't say starting to see, we see signs of over allocation throughout the state. And so, and that's led to the hardship. That leads to us regulating folks off. That leads to all sorts of negative impacts that we talked about. So we want to avoid that. And in order to avoid it, we want to look at how we allocate water throughout the state, or groundwater specifically. So we embarked on this rulemaking process, I'll say December of 2021, when we had a discussion with our commission, and we came away from that with this objective. We want to update the groundwater allocation rules to be more sustainable and protective of existing water right holders, both instream and outstream. And when we started to assess how we might go about that, we started by looking at our legislative authority in statute. Statute has a number of criteria for how we evaluate new applications for groundwater rights that we call informally a 4-part test. And we really focused only on one part of that, which is water available? And so our current rules right now say that water is available if the requested source is not over allocated. So essentially what that's asking us to do, or telling us to do, is if we get an application for a new water right, we will approve it up until we see over allocation. And now that it's over allocated, we need to deal with the over allocation at the same time as we stop issuing these rights. And so if we look a little closer at what over allocated means, first of all, it says allocate up to the full annual recharge volume. So that was kind of earlier in time part of that definition. And so again, if you think about that water cycle, the rules today say, well, whatever is coming in to the groundwater system, you can allocate that, which means that theoretically we could pull out all the water before it ever reaches the streams. And again, there's existing users depending on that groundwater discharge to the stream already. And then that was recognized, and there was rulemaking in the 90s where we have another layer of rules on top that says, okay, well, we don't want to impact those senior users on the streams. So what we're going to do is avoid short-term and acute impacts. So if your groundwater, your proposed groundwater use is going to impact the stream this irrigation season, or it exceeds some threshold, then we won't issue that proposed groundwater right. But if your impact builds slowly over years or decades, or if it's, you know, some small proportion, then we'll continue to issue those groundwater rights. And right now, we continue to issue groundwater rights that over time or cumulatively are going to continue to make it harder for senior service water right holders to get their usual and accustomed amount of water. And so our approach in these proposed rules that we're going to get into more detail later on these two highlighted terms is we want to take a different view of is water available. And we want to say water is available if groundwater level trends are reasonably stable. So that's actually a statutory policy that reasonably stable water levels be determined and maintained. That has been in statute since 1955, hasn't been defined in rule, and without a specific definition of what that means, we haven't been very effective at implementing that to date. We're also looking, when we look at groundwater surface water interaction, we want to say that a requested groundwater source is only available if it's hydraulically connected and that groundwater is discharging to a surface water body. We want to look at that surface water body and see if water is available there. Because if not, then that groundwater that's discharging there is already allocated. And then lastly, we want to look at just the physical capability or capacity of the aquifer to produce the proposed rate. So the rulemaking has been going on, as I said, since March, December of 2021 is the starting point. That's when we had a discussion with our commission. We've engaged the Groundwater Advisory Committee since March of 22. That was the first meeting after this December commission meeting. We had a number of public outreach meetings, including one here at Eastern Oregon University in fall of 2022 to take input from folks before we ever kind of made a first draft of the proposed rules. Then we engaged a Rules Advisory Committee, had 8 committee meetings with them, plus a couple technical meetings that they requested. And we've been doing a bunch of additional outreach meetings as requested throughout the state. And the rules have really benefited from the Rules Advisory Committee, and I want to acknowledge a good long period of input on their part, and really got input from a pretty diverse group of folks that represent a lot of different types of water users throughout the state. And again, we've iterated on the rules with their help, support, and input. Okay, so the two key issues that I want to focus on, the two main changes in these proposed rules. First one is defining reasonably stable groundwater levels. So again, as I said, that's a term of legislative policy and statute that didn't have a specific definition. It just, so what is reasonably stable? So the first thing we did was try to show what we were trying to define. And in short, water levels, this plot is showing various water levels through time. And we focusing on this blue water level trend where the kind of short term ups and downs, those are annual cycles. So groundwater naturally after the wet, relatively rainy, hopefully winter, or snowfall that's melted, water levels will come up. And then in the summer, when we get less precipitation, more groundwater use, water levels naturally fall, and it follows this up and down cycle. And because not every water year is the same, sometimes those spring highs are higher, and in a dry winter, they might be lower. And the climate difference, or the precipitation year on year that we see difference in Oregon in general, has about a 10-year cycle of wet and dry years historically. And superimposed on that is El Nino and La Nina cycles. So the peak here after recharge kind of goes up and down. But in general, reasonably stable, it's not a single number that exists, forever. It's this natural up and down. And so this blue bar here that in this plot is called the dynamically stable range, that's what we mean by reasonably stable. And so our next challenge was to put some actual numerical values to this. So we took a look at our existing data, looking backwards again. And we took wells for which we had water level data, which was more than 9,000 wells throughout the state. And we identified those that we had long-term trends. So we had water level data for 25 or more years. And that's a pretty long period for our records. But we wanted to be able to capture those with decadal cycles. And so that whittled the set down to about 350 years. We further screened those wells to make sure that we thought that they were dominantly responding to climate, because that's what we're looking for. And we found that with a statistical analysis of those wells, this decline rate during dry periods, so a dry climatic cycle, the decline rate for 90% or more of the wells that we have records for historically fell at a rate that was at or less than about half a foot a year, averaged over a 5 to 20 year period. So that, as opposed to rapid development of groundwater, and I've got a picture of that in a few slides where the decline might be faster than that. And secondly, because we can have long, slow declines due to groundwater development, we wanted to put a cap on the total decline. And again, from our historic records of climate responding wells over long periods of time, we found that the total decline was about 25 feet or less before a wet cycle picked that back up. So those are our proposed numerical standards for what defines reasonably stable. So summary of the rules. Again, as I just said, reasonably stable groundwater levels, the rules set up a definition that means that water level declines are no more than half a foot a year or 25 feet total from the highest known water level. And it sets further, the rules set out a amount of data one needs in order to test this. So it says, first of all, data must be from the aquifer from an individual application. So again, this rule is going to apply to applications for new water. The evaluation is going to be on an application by application basis, looking at the area for which the application is for. And so we need to have data from the aquifer that's being proposed to be used. And secondly, we need at least 5 years of data, and the most recent or last data point has to be, again, within the last 5 years. So we could have data from 5 to 10 years ago, that would be fine, 4 to 9 years ago, what have you. In, again, working with our RAC, some additional considerations came up. So sometimes human-caused activities can bump water levels up. So we've got groundwater level trends from wells that respond to a reservoir being built. And the reservoir, as the dam's built and the reservoir rises, that pushes water out into the system, and we can get water levels, these highest known water levels that are higher than what we've had on record in the past. So we want to be able to not choose that human caused impact. Also, in areas where we haven't had a lot of development, we wanted to not say, okay, well, there hasn't been any groundwater development here, you need to go out and put in a well and collect data. The rules say we can assume that that groundwater system is in equilibrium with the climate and therefore is reasonably stable without the information of that case. Or rather, I shouldn't say without information, I should say with the information, there hasn't been development in the area. of groundwater, yeah. And lastly, we reiterated in the draft rules that there can be another set of local rules. We call them basin program rules. They operate at an administrative watershed basin by basin. Those can redefine reasonably stable for that local area. And if that were to occur, then the Rules Advisory Committee that redefines it would have to take into account the impacts of the proposed new definition on existing wells, ecosystems, and long-term sustainability of the groundwater system. So just a quick example of how that might look. This is a real-life hydrograph from the Harney Basin where we have, again, this kind of up and down cyclical groundwater response to climate. And then in about the 1990s, additional groundwater development and water levels started falling. And we stopped issuing in 2012, about the time that water levels reached that definition of decline excessively. Under the proposed new rules, had they been in place in the past, we would have stopped issuing in 2007. And that probably still would have been over appropriated. We'd still have some declines to deal with, but those declines wouldn't reach that critical level of excessively declined nearly as soon. And now we're in the Harney Basin talking about a critical groundwater area and curtailing back junior users. We issued an additional 2,500 acres of irrigation in that intervening period, and that's additional investment that people have made in building out those irrigated ag pivots. That's that much more we're going to need to curtail back to bring water levels back into equilibrium. All right, and lastly on this, the impacts to domestic wells. So again, we've had a good is not the right term. We've had a significant uptick in dry well complaints recently. We set up a place to voluntarily report dry wells in July of 2021 and have received more than 1,200 dry well complaints since then. Various programs have been set up to help support folks in their need to deepen wells to reach water. And through that program, or the program that the Water Resources Department runs, average cost to deepen a well is about $26,000. And we have to date put more than 9 million in public funds into various support programs for well deepening, and the demand continues. So looking at the statewide risk of dry wells, we took a look, if you harken back, you can recall that plot of 250,000 water wells. We took the well logs for that 250,000 wells, or for those 250,000 wells, looked at total well depth, looked at the water level reported on the well log, and came up with about 15,000 wells that would be at risk of going dry, even given a 25-foot drop in water level. And if we look at the 50-foot drop in water level, up to 55,000 wells. So I don't want to say that we expect water levels across the state uniformly to drop by 25 feet or 50 feet. This is just the number of wells statewide at risk to those types of declines. Okay, gonna move on to key issue number 2. Again, this is an issue that looks at the linkage between hydraulically connected streams and redefining this term of art in rule, the potential for substantial interference with surface water. I'm going to do that through a story, and for those that were here in May of 22, you've heard the story before, but I'll repeat it because I know at least some people haven't seen this before. So this is a picture of Eagle Creek. Eagle Creek is a place that I like to go often in the summertime when it's hot in the Willamette Valley and dry. I can drive an hour and get to this stream. So this is a picture from late August, early September. Stream's always flowing. It's in a wilderness area. There's no dam above it. It's pretty low elevation. There's no snowpack that's melting off to support that flow. And it hasn't rained appreciably in 2, maybe 3 months. And yet I can always count on that stream flowing. And that's because that stream, as we see it in this picture, that's essentially all groundwater. That's water that has fallen as precipitation throughout the watershed. It's seeped in below the root zone. It's reached the water table and flowed to the lowest part of the watershed, and then it comes back up. And it supports this flow consistently year after year. And folks depend on this. So there's a fish hatchery downstream of this that depends on this stream flow, this groundwater discharge in summer. There are irrigators further down. And this stream is fully allocated. So essentially there's water rights for every drop of that groundwater that's coming up and flowing 5 months out of the year. And I should really say it's over allocated because the water master here says that she regulates about 3 out of every 4 years. So surface water right holders are regulated off of this stream 3 out of 4 years. And yet we're still issuing groundwater rights in this basin. And again, if you can picture our water cycle, these groundwater rights, even though they're likely somewhat far from the stream, more than a quarter mile, maybe more than a mile, they're still eventually going to impact discharge to that stream. And essentially that's going to continue to impact those senior surface water users in our prior appropriation system that aren't receiving their, their full permitted amount. And so what we're planning to do, is to take a new look. And instead of saying, well, if the groundwater right is just 1% of the flow you see there or the application, we'll issue that 1%. But we'll do that without limit to as many permits as we get. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5% up. Instead of saying, well, if we don't see an impact this season, but it builds over time, then we'll still issue it. Instead of doing that, what the new rules propose is we're going to look at the water availability in that stream. And if there's still surface water available, to allocate, then we'll allocate additional groundwater rights. But if that surface water body is fully allocated, then the new proposed rules say we shouldn't issue groundwater rights that are tributary to that fully allocated surface water. One other thing on this, again, hydraulically connected streams exist throughout the state. Not all streams are hydraulically connected, but many are. This is a picture of the Sprague River down in the Upper Klamath Basin, where we know that groundwater discharge is a portion of that stream flow. There's also snowmelt in this particular system in the summertime, but groundwater makes up some portion of that. And again, this stream is not only fully allocated, but essentially all but the most senior water right holder here for surface water are regulated off, have been regulated off since 2014. And yet groundwater users throughout the basin continue to pump because of how the rules are set up. And so while this rulemaking, I want to stress it's not going to affect any of the existing groundwater users. In this case, it'll help us not make the problem worse, right? It'll help us not continue to issue in places where, again, that groundwater is feeding surface water systems that aren't adequate to meet the current needs of folks. So with that, in a nutshell, the proposed rule changes, again, look at this term, this defined term, potential for substantial interference, and they say if the groundwater system is hydraulically connected, and that if is going to be defined by an assessment of best available information, the same as it is today. So applications today, applications in the future under the proposed rules that they pass will have the same hydraulic connection assessment conducted. But if that's true, over the proposed period of use, then this term potential for substantial interference is going to assume to exist. And we're going to go from potential to actual substantial interference by looking at the surface water source and seeing, is it already over appropriated? Is it restrictively classified? Is it regulated off to satisfy senior rights? Or is there an in-stream water right that hasn't been met? So we're going to look to the qualities of the hydraulically connected surface water body to determine whether a groundwater use will have substantial interference with that surface water body and the existing users on it. Okay, so the implications of this are that we are going to expect to issue fewer new groundwater rights under the proposed new rules than we do today. And that means that we're gonna need to look other places to meet our future needs. So there's a number of options that exist today, from conservation or subsurface storage or augmentation, reuse and transfers of existing water rights. And there's likely the potential for new or future opportunities. So there's a mitigation program in the Deschutes Basin, for example, that mitigates groundwater pumping impacts on surface water. That might be possible in other parts of the state through our place-based planning approaches, which there's been one here in the Grande area. We've heard folks talk about market-based approaches through those. And there's other types of outcomes and voluntary agreements or other potential programs that might come out of these basin or regional planning goals. That said, we feel that the proposed rules have some significant benefits to existing users, including increased certainty that existing users will have the water that they already have permitted available for their use going forward. We believe that the proposed rules will result in fewer dry wells, lower pumping costs, preserve water quality in some cases throughout the state. But I guess I think I want to hit mostly on, we think that the proposed new rules are more consistent with the prior appropriation doctrine. And that's going to reduce future conflict that nobody wants in the future. So with that, we're currently in the public hearing portion of the rulemaking. So again, we'll have time to answer some questions after this. And then the hearing is going to be at 7 o'clock, and Laura will have more about that. Written comments, as Annette mentioned, are going to be accepted through the end of May. The website to make those comments is on the handouts up top. We'll be evaluating comments in June and July, and our plan is to present the final proposed rules to the commission in September of 2024. So with that, there's more information online. Again, that web page is on the handouts. You can snap a picture.
FAQ, frequently asked questions sheet, there's information on there about
Yeah.
the website.
So all of the RAC meetings were recorded. There's a lot of information there. So with that, happy to answer any questions.
Okay, and I'm gonna be running the mic around, and I want to thank everybody for their interest and attention. I saw some people taking notes and photos. I want to note this presentation is on our website as well. And this informational session is being recorded, which will also be posted on our website. So questions? And because we're recording, you can talk into the mic.
So my question is, if you stated, Justin, that the surface water rights aren't fully allocated, that Water Resources Department would issue permits for groundwater. Is that accurate?
That is one component of all the criteria. So that is specifically related to the finding of potential for substantial interference or not. And it would have to meet all the 4-part tests that are in statute. So no injury, consistent with the basin program rules and other rules of the commission. And under the proposed rules, water levels would need to be reasonably stable, which is more often the case in hydraulically connected systems because there's a good flow path through flow. So in that case, yes, if water was available in the stream, and again, that's water availability. Well, it's not, again, this is a detail, it wasn't in there. Excuse me, sorry, go ahead. Okay.
I didn't know to interrupt.
Yep.
You said if surface water was available.
Yes, yeah,
Specifically in your presentation.
yep,
If surface water was available.
yep,
That there was an opportunity for groundwater permit.
correct.
In the state, how many areas or basins are there where that is the case, that surface water is available at the present time?
Yeah, correct. So, I'll go back to, oops, I overshot it, I think. Oh, no, I didn't. I will go back to here. So hard to see, but the basins that are colored in purple, have water available in August, which likely means that water is available, in the allocation system, 12 months of the year.
So under the new proposed rules that you're presenting here, how many areas within the state will be impacted, would be your estimate based on that graphic that you're showing?
Yeah, sure.
What percentage of the state would be impacted that they will not be allowed to have permits for groundwater?
Yes, so, two-part answer. So first of all, hydraulic connection has to be established. And if that's the case, I couldn't tell you what the percentage is here that's tan, but it's a significant percentage.
Are there other people who have questions?
Yeah, thanks, Justin. It's interesting to hear how the message has been refined. One question I have as a certified water rights examiner is, when advising my clients, transfers you mentioned as being a key kind of part of the solution moving forward. Are these allocation rules going to be able to affect the way that additional constraints can be put on existing certificates and permits when moving through the transfer process?
Yeah, so no, this rule, proposed rule change affects only applications for new water rights and doesn't affect any of the rule sets that impact transfers.
Okay, so it won't affect, the conditions don't become more stringent in connection with these new rules.
Correct.
So you mentioned that, likelihood would be there would be fewer groundwater rights issued. So here in the Grand Basin, how many were issued last year?
Boy, I don't have that off the top of my head, so, yeah.
Well, I think it's basically came to a halt already.
It's certainly been on the decline, yeah. So, in the Grand Basin, I know that the alluvial aquifer system, the superficial unconfined system, we haven't issued a water right, since, it was based on the Scenic Waterway Act, right? And the impacts of groundwater pumping on the Scenic Waterway Act exceeded the threshold there. And so we haven't issued, rights to the shallow system. We have issued more rights to the deeper, Powder River volcanics. But I mean, there haven't been a lot of applications, and some of them, even when they did get a water right, the resource wasn't there to prove of.
So do you believe that this hydraulic and conductivity is gonna apply to the salt wells as well?
No, actually, our assessments to date, so I could say no generally. So we have done assessments, variously throughout the Grand Ronde Valley, and found that those deeper systems are not effectively hydraulically connected. And that's why we've continued to issue water rights for those deeper systems.
Anybody else have any questions? All right, remember.
Again, in your presentation, you mentioned that 25 years of looking at data, over 9,000 wells. You mentioned that reservoirs were one of the things that could cause a human impact to the groundwater system.
Mhm.
If that's the case, then we're trying to, we being the users of water and the Water Resources Department, are trying to enhance that groundwater table for the aquifer, then why are we not constructing more reservoirs?
Oh, outside the scope of the rules. I mean, that's obviously a long-standing question, and that's not something that I deal with the groundwater system, so.
Well, they're all intertwined.
Sure, yeah, that's true. And there have been, artificial groundwater recharge projects that have been developed, in various spots across the state. So, those have been developed for, water augmentation in cases, so. And we expect that to continue into the future.
Other questions?
Maybe just a comment, if this is the case, and I don't know everything by far. If Oregon Water Resources is an advocate for promoting water use properly, I think OWRE should be advocating for more storage and control as an advocate. And that would go against a lot of other state agencies, I suppose. But if we really want to get serious about it, we need storage to make things work.
And I would encourage you to put that comment on the record when we do the public hearing. I appreciate the comment. Are there any other questions?
Dylan Warren, a new certified water right examiner and a member of the RAC. I have one question on surface water availability, Justin, and the WARS program. Does the WARS program take into account the groundwater wells within 1 mile of the stream in question?
So yes, under the current system, if a proposed groundwater use is found to have the potential for substantial interference, and there's water available in the WAR system, then when a water right is issued, that groundwater use is debited from the WAR system. In cases where there was no PSI finding under the current rules, so any wells further than 1 mile from a hydraulically connected stream and other thresholds for rate and what have you, then it's not debited to the.
Okay, so if I understand that right, it's during the analysis using the WARS program, the groundwater wells in the reach are analyzed at that time. It's part of the budget, it's part of the water, if they're hydraulically connected.
Just to make sure I know, you're talking in the existing rules or in the proposed future rules?
No, let's just talk proposed rules.
Okay, so in the proposed rules, we would debit any new hydraulically connected groundwater right that we issued. So to turn that around, if there was a proposal for a new use and we found hydraulic connection and there was water available in the WAR system and all the other conditions were met, then we would debit that from the WAR system. Did I understand your question appropriately? Yeah.
I think yes.
Other questions? On the dry well report on page 9, it shows that Union County has a dry well. I would love to be able to get some specific information on that after the meeting.
Yeah, I think if you wouldn't mind giving your contact information on one of those 3x5 cards, we can follow up.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Okay, it is 6:21 now. We will set up for the hearing. Thank you again for coming, and we'll start the hearing promptly at 7.